Welcome to Law You Should Know. The law affects every aspect of our lives, our home, our jobs, and our recreational activities. Now you can learn about the law and how to protect yourself against the loss of your liberty or property. Learn how to stand up for your rights and seek compensation when you have been wronged. Your host for Law You Should Know is attorney Kenneth J. Landau with the Mineola Law Firm of Shane, Dox, Denisi, and Corker. He's a member of the Committee on Professional Ethics of the Bar Association of Nassau County and counsel to the Nassau Academy of Law. And now, here is your host for Law You Should Know, attorney Kenneth J. Landau.
Hi, this is Ken Landau, and welcome to Law You Should Know. Today we'll be talking about a unique aspect of real estate as we have our real estate series right here on WHPC. And my guest is Donna Davis. She's a licensed real estate salesperson, and she is associated with the Charles Rutenberg Realty with offices in Plainview. She covers all of Long Island and Queens, and of course represents buyers and sellers. And also she helps tenants try to find rentals. One aspect of that is the ability of homeowners to rent the Section 8 tenants. And sometimes it's a good thing for both the tenant and the landlord. And little is known about the process, so I'm glad to have Donna here to share her expertise. Donna, welcome to Law You Should Know.
Thank you very much, Ken.
And tell us more first about what Section 8 is.
Okay, great. The Section 8 program is actually called the Housing Choice Voucher Program. It's run by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, commonly referred to as HUD. It assists low-income families with rental payments. The vouchers are administered locally by public housing agencies called PHAs.
And this program is designed to give tenants flexibility in finding a house to rent.
Absolutely, Ken. One of the beauties of the program is that participants are not restricted to finding rentals in subsidized housing projects. They can find private rentals in homes, multifamily homes, as well as apartment buildings. So,
and the government is helping to pay part of the cost of the rent. So they're getting like a voucher, or so they're getting an individual subsidy, which they can use to their advantage, and the landlord can take advantage of them as a tenant who'll be able to pay the rent.
Absolutely.
So how can a landlord, why is the program a good thing for a landlord?
Well, it's a great thing for a landlord because the landlord will get payments directly from the Section 8 program. So as far as that portion of the rent is concerned, there's no risk of non-payment as there is with a regular rental where the landlord is dependent on the tenant to pay all of the rent.
Aside from income, does a tenant have to meet any special qualifications?
Yes. As part of the eligibility process for Section 8, the tenant's income, assets, and family composition are first reviewed.
Okay. But the idea is also to find a space with an adequate size for that family. Absolutely.
So family size is very much part of the process, and the number of bedrooms that they would be allowed to get is based on the family size.
And in figuring out the amount of the voucher, is HUD keeping in mind the higher cost of real estate or rents on Long Island or Queens?
Absolutely. What HUD does every year is come up with something called fair market rent schedule, and what they do is an analysis of the rents in particular areas, and one of the areas is Nassau or Suffolk, and each year those rents can be adjusted based on the size of the rental. So, for example, we have a table for rents for studios, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, and all the way up to 4 bedrooms.
And they would have a rent ceiling or a maximum rent, but then they would give a certain percentage and pay that directly to the landlord.
Yes, the way the program is designed is so that the eligible tenants pay only 30% of their income towards rent. And the Section 8 program would pick up the rest up to a maximum total rent.
Okay, and is there a maximum percentage of the rent that they would pick up, or if the tenant had a very low income and let's say qualified for a large space, would they pick up like 90% of it?
In some cases, yes, because in some cases the tenant does have a very, very low income. For example, there are tenants who are on disability and their payments may be low. So the Section 8 payment may actually be a higher proportion of the total rent.
And is it a permanent program for the tenant, or year to year, or for the length of the lease?
Well, a lease term usually has to be at least 1 year just to start the program. And then each year the tenant does have to continue to meet eligibility requirements.
And if it's a permanent disability, they might, qualify for the program year after year?
Absolutely.
Okay. So is a Section 8 tenant a good tenant to have?
Well, I can't say one way or the other whether they're a good tenant to have. The benefit of the program is that a portion of their rent is basically guaranteed by the government.
And a relatively large percentage.
It can be a large percentage, absolutely. And the tenant can look at different apartments and pick and choose what they can afford and what will meet their needs. Yes, that's one of the beauties of the program, is that they are not restricted to a particular area except for, a general area where they would want to live. They're not restricted to a particular type, as long as there's a understanding that the landlord will be working with the Section 8 program and the unit passes inspection.
And so what does the landlord have to do to work with the Section 8 program?
Well, to start out with the program, the tenants have something called a packet, and it's basically a list of documents that they have to provide. They have to explain first what the rent is that they're asking. They have to explain which utilities will be paid by the landlord and by the tenant. They have to explain who provides those utilities, and they will also have to provide certain documentation. For example, one important piece of documentation would be proof of ownership of the property and proof that they are current on their property taxes. So things like that.
And does the agency also go out and inspect to the property to make sure it's suitable for tenants?
Yes, absolutely. There is an inspection before the actual Section 8 lease can start. It's to make sure that the unit meets what's called the initial housing quality standards.
And that assures that the tenants will have a quality apartment or house or part of a house.
Yes, they want to make sure that the tenant is moving into a unit that is safe and habitable.
And if a tenant, can there be a situation where, let's say a person is a real estate investor and they own an extra house or a co-op or something along that line, and then they can rent it out to a qualified Section 8 tenant?
Oh, yes, definitely. In fact, one of the rentals that I did a few years ago was just that type of situation. The owner was actually also a real estate agent himself, and he and family members had bought a property with the intent to sell it. But the market may have been a little soft at the time, so they decided to rent it out, and I found a tenant for them, and that tenant moved in, and everything worked out very nicely.
And there were a lot of, tenants who qualify for Section 8 looking for suitable housing. So for someone who wants to be an investor, or might be traveling, or might be moving, or may own a second house as an investment, this is a ready source of tenants for them. And as you said, they are, the government or the program is subsidizing a lot of the rent, so that kind of avoids or minimizes collection issues.
Yes, it does, and that's one of the key benefits of the Section 8 program to the landlord. In addition, the payments are made directly to the landlord, so the tenant never touches any of that money.
Is the landlord allowed to do any economic screening, like to look at a credit score or get a reference from prior landlord, or it's really not necessary?
Well, it's certainly up to the landlord. As part of the service that we would provide or we can provide, we can refer the tenant to a tenant screening service, and that service will collect all the information about the tenant. It's not something that we see or share with the tenant per se, but the tenant can definitely be screened with respect to credit, with respect to their rental history, with respect to whether or not they've been in landlord-tenant court, and also their criminal background checks as well.
And every tenant can act on their own. They don't need to get a listing from an agency. They might get it from a broker, or they might just learn about some apartment or house or part of a house available.
That's true, but what I've found in my own experience, at least, Ken, is that sometimes the tenants are not as well versed at presenting the program on their own as, say, an agent like myself might be able to.
And you're educating both tenants and landlords about the program.
Absolutely.
And you want helping landlords qualify for the program, and you're helping tenants to qualify for the program as well.
Well, with the tenants, they're already qualified for the program, and usually with them, their issue is finding a unit that they can rent.
And you're going to coach them on that?
Absolutely.
Okay. And so more than one tenant, more than one or two Section 8 tenants might look at a particular apartment, and then it's up to the landlord and the tenants to decide whether there's a match.
That's true. And in fact, there could very well be a case where there's people who are not on a Section 8 program. There could be, I guess, what we would call regular tenants and Section 8 tenants all looking at the same unit. And it's up to the landlord to decide, which one they would like.
Can the section, if there's a bidding war, can the landlord theoretically increase the rent? Or it has to be within that ceiling?
Right. Well, Section 8 has guidelines as to what the maximum rent can be, so there would not necessarily be a bidding war with respect to Section 8 tenants.
Okay. And what about if what type of unit, let's say it's a big house and maybe it's like a mother-daughter or a two-family or a three-family, under what situations, if we're talking about a house, might a homeowner, especially if they're single or elderly or disabled themselves, be able to rent out a house, hold or a part of the house to a tenant?
Well, generally speaking, Section 8 would not necessarily allow rental of part of the house,
okay.
Because one of the documents they would look at is also the certificate of occupancy. So if we're talking about a two-family house, then the expectation is that the Section 8 tenant would be in their own apartment, and the owner of the property or even another tenant would be in the other apartment.
And it has to be a legitimate apartment.
It has to be legal.
A legal apartment. That's the word I was looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Any other advice you can give to tenants on presenting themselves well, or getting coaching in advance so that they will qualify?
Well, what I explain to tenants is that it's pretty much like interviewing for a job. I think that you should come dressed appropriately, and speak clearly. Do not tell any fibs. Explain your situation correctly and accurately. And just like in any other thing, you're trying to basically sell yourself so that the landlord will select you.
Okay. Does the landlord have to do the same thing?
And what?
Like a job interview, like they're being interviewed as a potential employer. Or it's more on the tenant?
Potentially, but again, because there's so much demand by the tenants that basically the landlord can usually have their pick of tenants.
Okay. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll talk about the market for Section 8 homes and how, again, you help landlords make their excess property available for that market, along with more details on how the system works. And we're talking to Donna Davis. She's a licensed real estate salesperson associated with Charles Rutenberg Realty, which is located in Plainview, but she covers all over Long Island and Queens. You're listening to Law You'd Know here on 90.3 WHPC, the voice of Nassau Community College, and also over the internet at nccradio.org. We'll be back in a moment.
This portion of programming on WHPC is brought to you on behalf of the Nassau County Bar Association, who wants you to know about ADR, Alternate Dispute Resolution, which can help you avoid costly, lengthy, and uncertain litigation in court. By resolving disputes through mediation or arbitration, it gives you control over who decides your case. A mediator helps all parties to reach an agreement they can live with, or an arbitrator selected by the parties hears and decides the case. Your attorney can still represent you, but you control who decides your case. ADR is faster and less stressful than fighting in court, and it is a great way to resolve divorce, employment, or commercial disputes. ADR is now offered through the Nassau County Bar Association. Find out more about how ADR can help resolve your dispute by calling 516-747-4070 or visit nassaubar.org.
Once again, we continue with Law You Should Know. From the Mineola Law Firm of Shane, Dox, Denise, Corker, and Sauer, here is attorney Kenneth J. Landau.
Hi, this is Ken Landau, and welcome back to Law You Should Know. We're talking with Donna Davis. She's a licensed real estate salesperson, and she's associated with Charles Rutenberg Realty with an office in Plainview. And she's talking about how Section 8 housing can help both landlords and also tenants, but especially the landlords, because as she mentioned, there are more people with Section 8 vouchers who seek housing that qualifies for Section 8. And I'm going to give you a contact number later in the program in case a tenant or landlord has any questions. She'll be glad to help them. You mentioned there's an inspection process. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. What will happen is once the documents go into Section 8 and everything looks okay, meaning there's proof that the owner actually owns the property, that they're current on taxes, an inspection will be scheduled, and someone will come out and go through the property in a fair amount of detail to make sure it's safe and habitable. They'll look for carbon monoxide detectors. They'll check to see that there's adequate basement access, and one of the things that can cause a property to fail inspection is if the owner leaves their property in the rental unit. That's not allowed under the inspection guidelines, and there cannot be any beds, stoves, hot plates, refrigerators, etc. in the basement of the unit.
Okay. Can a landlord retain like the basement or a storage room to store their property, and that's not part of the area being leased?
Typically, no, but that's an issue that I think maybe we can work with the building department on, because it is a little bit onerous, because a lot of landlords do want to keep their basements for storage because it obviously saves them some money. And
the tenant may not need that.
And the tenant may not need that.
And perhaps it can be sealed off and not really part of the rental area.
Right.
And if there's a meeting of the minds, the tenant has found an apartment, it's passed inspection, the landlord has found a tenant, is there a lease, a Section 8 lease that has to be used?
Absolutely. There's actually two documents that end up being signed. One is a standard lease with which most folks are familiar, and the other one is the Housing Assistance Payment Contract, the HAP contract, and that specifies all of the obligations of the parties, the obligations of the tenant to pay their rent on time and keep the property in good order, and the obligation of the landlord to do the same and to provide the utilities if that's part of the package.
And if there's a problem, can the tenant complain to Section 8 aside from the normal building departments?
Absolutely, and that it does happen. These are aside from there being a Section 8 program, this is a typical landlord-tenant type situation where issues arise between the parties.
Okay. And are there any tax advantages, let's say, for the homeowner who's renting out their house or perhaps a separate unit within the house?
Well, I'm not aware of there being any impact on a property owner's property taxes per se, but if an owner has a concern in this area, he or she should consult a tax or financial advisor.
And it may work out as like a source of outside income or a real estate investment for them, so they might be able to deduct certain expenses associated with that, and of course they'll have to report the income in connection with that other property.
Yes, that sounds reasonable. Yes.
Okay, but they should speak to their tax advisor. What are some other considerations?
Well, one of the biggest sources of confusion with Section 8 is on the rent itself. Many landlords and tenants alike often think that, let's say a landlord is looking for $3,000 a month, for example, for a 4-bedroom house. Well, the guidelines for fiscal year 2019, which started on November 1st, 2018, say that the maximum rent for a 4-bedroom house in our area is around $2,800.
Okay, and that's the total rent.
That's the total rent.
Okay.
Now, what Section 8 will do, or actually it's done at the local level by the Public Housing Agency, they will then deduct from that maximum rent something called utility allowances. So for any utilities that the tenant is going to pay, they deduct an amount.
And does generally the tenant pay the whole utilities, or that's something they have to work out with the landlord?
They work that out with the landlord.
Okay.
Yeah.
But if the overall package is too high to qualify, then sometimes maybe they segregate the utilities.
Well, the way it has to work in order for it to be legal under Section 8 guidelines is that any utilities that the tenant pays have to be in the tenant's name. There cannot be any sharing of utilities.
Okay.
And that's an issue where sometimes people get themselves into a little bit of trouble there. But the main problem is when, say, the asking rent is much higher than the guidelines. Some people think that it's okay for them to pay even more, above that amount, so that they can pay, say, the $3,000.
So the landlord and the tenant cannot exceed the guidelines?
No, they cannot. They cannot. There cannot be any side payments.
And the tenant also would have to qualify for a subsidy that large. They'd have to have a family size to warrant a 4-bedroom house?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Okay. But there might be properties within an area, within a town, within a neighborhood that might qualify.
Yeah.
The new house on the block may not qualify.
That's true. Or something on, say, the Gold Coast may not qualify as well. Yes.
But Long Island is a pretty big place.
It is, and there are a lot of rentals that can work. But that's the area that agents and landlords and tenants need to stay away from because it's illegal.
And is there some kind of cancellation provision? Let's say the landlord was going to rent it out, but then he has a buyer. Is he allowed to cancel the lease prematurely?
Well, I've actually never observed that type of situation. Typically, it's like any other legal agreement. Once you sign the contract, you've signed the contract. And that person has the right to move into the property for the term that's envisioned by the contract.
Okay. But this could be a very good thing for someone who has to vacate their house. Let's say they're moving to Florida. They don't want to put it on the market right now. Maybe they think the market will get better. Or maybe they're unsure of their future plans.
That's correct.
And this way it helps someone and it generates income for them. And perhaps some tax advantages.
That's very true.
Okay. What other information would you like to tell our listeners about the program?
Well, I think that the main thing for landlords is that some of them don't really know how the program works. So they become a little fearful when someone talks about Section 8. Some are not sure of how the paperwork moves, and that's where an agent like myself comes into play, because there are usually some deadlines. So, for example, if you want a lease that starts at the beginning of the month, it's usually have to make sure that everything's in and the property is inspected and passes inspection, say, by the 15th of the previous month.
So there's a 2-week period until a tenant can move in.
Yes.
And how long does the whole process take? You've told us about the process, the inspections, the qualifying. How long does that take?
Well, it sort of depends. There can be situations where tenants are sort of in an emergency situation. Let's say someone's homeless and they're Section 8 worker, because each of the tenants is assigned someone at the public housing agency who's working with them. So their worker may be able to push their paperwork through a little faster. There have also been situations, one rental, for example, that I did in Inwood a few months ago, where they can move them in, they can start the lease in the middle of the month as opposed to waiting until the first of the month.
Can a family, bring in other relatives to help qualify for a bigger space, assuming they're entitled to Section 8? Can they double up as long as there's adequate living space?
They could do so, but at the inception of applying for Section 8. So when you apply, you're stating, well, this is my family composition, this is what everyone makes, and they look at that to determine whether or not you're even eligible.
So they're looking at the whole package, but if there's a larger size family and the income's within the guidelines, they might qualify for perhaps a larger Section 8 property. That's
definitely true.
Is there any fee to the tenant or the landlord, and is it paid by them or paid by the Section 8 program?
Well, it works like
general.
It works like a regular rental. If there's an agent involved, as in any rental, there would be a broker fee, typically.
And is there any practice as to who pays it, or it's really negotiable between the parties? It's
totally negotiable, but typically the tenant pays the broker fee.
Okay. And just give us your number so listeners can contact you to find out more about the program.
Okay, my number is 516-867-7972.
Okay, and you can be of help to tenants to look at houses that might qualify and to get everything in order so they have a better chance of qualifying. And you can also advise landlords on how they can qualify their properties for the program.
Yes, I already have the inspection checklist, so I use that when I first go see a property, and I walk through and talk to the landlord about issues that I might see.
Okay, and Donna Davis, thank you for being on the show, and just give us your contact number again.
Yes, my number is 516-867-7972.
And I think Donna will be free to share her expertise in Section 8, and she's also regular real estate broker covering Queens and Long Island in case anyone needs her services in buying or selling a house. Keep in mind, whatever we said today is presented as advice only. You should get your own legal advice from your own legal professional. You're listening to Law You Should Know here on 90.3 WHPC, and also over the internet at nccradio.org. If you missed any part of this program, it's also available as a free podcast by going to nccradio.org. Please join us this same time next week for another program on Law You Should Know.